I will not be silenced. Not by you, not by anyone.
You don't belong in this place. The policy is absolute, and it speaks louder than you.
Policy twisted into a weapon is nothing but prejudice dressed in a suit. It will never erase my dignity.
Then prove you're worthy, because right now, all I see is someone who never was.
The words hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Around them, the boutique's glow dimmed into unease, every shopper caught between polished glass and the raw edge of truth. It was no longer about a purchase. It was about who had the right to stand tall without permission. And in that silence, one question echoed louder than velvet or marble. When rules are used to deny dignity, who will defend justice? This story is far from over. Evelyn's about to face an even greater challenge. If you believe justice must prevail, leave a comment with the word justice and follow for the next chapter. The late afternoon light on Rodeo Drive had the soft warmth of a holiday postcard. Strings of white bulbs traced the palms like careful handwriting, and window displays glowed with winter stories invented for the season. Outside the Chanel boutique, valet attendants jogged towards sedans and SUVs, accepting keys with a polite ma'am or sir, while shoppers in wool coats compared notes about gift lists and where to find the best hot chocolate on Beverly Drive. Inside, the air smelled faintly of leather and citrus. Sales associates moved with rehearsed grace, smoothing silk on glass, aligning boxes until every ribbon lay flat. It was a time of year when America dressed itself in patience and sparkle, and yet a different kind of attention followed the older woman who had just stepped through the door. Her name was Evelyn Carter. She was 68, tall enough to look a salesperson in the eye without craning, and she favored an understated coat the color of midnight. The coat had seen travel and good care, and it held the quiet confidence of things chosen, not flaunted. From the threshold, Evelyn took in the room as if listening rather than looking. The soft hum of a heater fighting back the mild California cold. The whisper of a couple from out of town debating whether the wallet or the small bag would say, "Thank you better." The discreet bell from the stockroom. She had come for a handbag she had seen months earlier in New York, a winter edition in a shade that reminded her of the inside of a piano. The manager noticed her almost immediately. His name was Brian Keller, and he wore a tie that matched the boutique's black and cream. He had perfected a neutral smile that could tilt warmer or cooler depending on the price tag in the customer's hand. When Evelyn paused before the central display, his smile cooled by a degree. He took 2 steps closer, not close enough to crowd her, just close enough to be the first voice she would hear. "Good afternoon," he said, careful and bright. "Can I help you find something specific?" Evelyn nodded toward the bag, the one seated on its little pedestal as if it had been invited to perform. "I'd like to see that one," she said. Her voice had the gentleness of someone who had given a lot of instructions in life and learned there is power in not raising it. Brian hesitated a fraction, then reached for the key that released the stand. He lifted the bag with both hands and placed it on the counter. "It's a limited color," he offered a detail phrased like a test. "I know," she said, tracing the stitching with the pad of a gloved finger. "It's precise." 2 customers near the scarf display had stopped talking. The younger one, a woman in a camel coat holding a cup with a green mermaid, leaned toward her companion. "Do you think she's actually shopping?" she whispered, the way people whisper when they hope to be heard by everyone and no one. This place gets all kinds in December. The words were not loud, but the boutique was an echo chamber for small judgments. Evelyn heard them, allowed them to pass through her, and returned her attention to the bag. The leather accepted the light without glare. She asked about the strap length. He answered. She asked about the hardware. He supplied the terms: aged, gold, hand-finished. His tone suggested that information was a currency she might not be able to spend. Outside, a bus rolled past with a billboard for a holiday concert downtown. Inside, a sales associate carried a tray of sparkling water to a couple trying on shoes. The associate set the tray down and, almost as an afterthought, set down a plate of little butter cookies, as if today's courtesy might secure tomorrow's loyalty. America loved a good transaction, and December loved it most of all. Evelyn requested, softly, to feel the weight of the bag on her shoulder. She lifted it with care, the way one lifts a newborn or an argument, and checked the mirror. The bag sat against her coat as if it had always known where to rest. In the reflection, she noticed Brian watching not the bag, but her hands. "Would you like me to check availability in back?" he asked. "We have additional colors that might be more fitting." The pause on the last words wasn't long, but it contained a story as old as line cues and velvet ropes. "I'm looking at this one," she said. The door chimed. A pair of tourists drifted in, speaking softly about dinner reservations at a steakhouse on Wilshire, wondering whether valet expected cash or whether a card and a thank you would do. An associate greeted them and steered them toward the jewelry case, and the room resumed its curated rhythm. Still, a small gravity had formed around Evelyn, the way gravity forms around anything that makes other people wonder who is allowed to belong. Brian gestured toward the register. "Just so you know, this item has a waiting list," he said. "We tend to reserve it for clients who—" He did not finish the sentence, but the word regulars hovered like a closed door. Evelyn's face did not change. Her eyes were the steady part of a winter sea. She asked him to quote the current price, and he did, pronouncing each digit as if it might be a barrier she would meet with a shrug. She nodded, not in approval, not in surprise, but as a person acknowledging that numbers are simply a way of measuring whether something matters enough to bring it home. The younger woman with the coffee spoke again, this time to her friend. "I saw a video about this last week," she murmured. "A lady tried to walk out with a bag. Security had to—" She stopped because Brian had glanced in her direction, and because there are moments when rumor decides it would rather become policy. From the back, a second lead emerged. Melissa Grant, her hair in a severe bun that added an inch to her authority. She took in the tableau, Evelyn with the bag, Brian with his professional doubt, and selected a smile that looked like customer service but felt like surveillance. "Is there a problem?" Melissa asked. "No problem," Brian said, though the words sounded like a warning to the air. He shifted his attention. "Ma'am, if you're considering purchasing, I'll need to see a card for a hold. December inventory moves quickly." Evelyn met his gaze. She was used to requests, used to being asked to prove, to sign, to send a follow-up email, to confirm what had already been confirmed. She placed the bag on the counter with the kind of care that is, in itself, a credential. "I'll take it," she said. Melissa's brows lifted just slightly, the way curtains lift before a scene. "Of course," she said. "We can ring you up right here." Woo! In the mirror behind the counter, Evelyn could see more than fabric and glass. She could see a braid of impatience, curiosity, and the brittle energy that comes when people suspect something remarkable might happen, and they hope for it even if it embarrasses them to admit it. She could also see herself, the small scar near her lip from a childhood tumble, the calm that had carried her through boardrooms and airport lounges and hospital waiting rooms. Calm is not weakness. Calm is a technology. She rested her hands on the counter and asked about gift wrap. Melissa explained options in a tone that narrated a threshold: standard, premium, signature. A man at the far end of the counter. He wore a blazer and a look that had learned to be unimpressed mother to his partner, that you could spot the real clients by their shoes. It was not meant to be heard. It was heard anyway. Evelyn returned the bag gently, as if assuring it that decisions were not a threat. The boutique breathed. Tissue paper rustled. Someone laughed softly at the memory of the last New Year's Eve on Santa Monica Boulevard. A ring tapped accidentally against glass. From Rodeo Drive came the muffled beep of a delivery truck reversing. December tended to everyone, even as it asked certain people to justify why they were here. She stood there, an older black woman in a room designed to flatter money into feeling inevitable, and she did not shrink. Not from the glance that slid over her coat in search of a logo and found none, not from the question coiled inside Melissa's posture, not from the arithmetic Brian performed with his eyes, counting assumptions like coins. "Will that be all?" Brian asked, and the words sounded generous in the way a locked door can sound generous, if you call it a boundary. "For now," she said. "Yes." Behind them, a sales associate guided a young couple toward the register. The associate offered to engrave a small charm with a date. "We can do it for you by tomorrow, or by the day after tomorrow at the latest." and the couple smiled as if a piece of metal might hold the weight of a promise. A valet hustled past the window toward a car where a woman was tucking a tip into her palm, folding the bill so the gesture would be private. The sky shifted toward the evening, trading gold for the blue that photographs use when they want to look like memory. When Melissa asked for a car to begin, she did it politely. And yet, politeness can carry a sharp edge when laid on top of doubt. Evelyn understood that edge. She had felt it in bank lobbies and at hotel check-in counters and at the doors of places that had hired architects to translate belonging into marble. She pressed her fingers against the leather of her gloves for a breath and then reached, slowly, into her bag. The room leaned in. The couple by the shoes stole a glance. The woman with the coffee went still. Brian adjusted his tie in case someone important might be looking. The light found its way across the counter and settled like a held breath. Evelyn reached for her wallet, slow and unhurried, letting a black metal card catch the light, yet no one in the room truly believed it belonged to her. Late afternoon settled deeper over Rodeo Drive, and the boutique brightened itself to meet the early dusk. The glass cases gleamed under careful light. Silk and lambskin seemed to exhale a hush that kept conversation measured and soft. At the door, a greeter said, "Good evening," the way a string section begins, a familiar piece. And valet runners in dark jackets jogged to and from the curb, where guests folded tips discreetly into their palms. From across the street, the steam of a coffee cup lifted in the cool air, carrying a scent that mixed with the boutique's faint trace of citrus and leather. Yesterday's headlines about record holiday sales hovered, the kind of talk that makes everyone certain they understand what belongs where. The notion stayed in the room like a low instrument, and it followed Evelyn Carter as she stepped to the counter with the patient focus of someone who had lived long enough to let first impressions pass without comment. She asked for the winter edition bag again, and Brian Keller, with the posture of a man keeping score, obliged with a small flourish of the display key. The bag rested on velvet like a promise. Evelyn studied the stitching, as if reading a line she already loved. She asked a few quiet questions about the strap, the length, the way the hardware would wear. He answered with the clipped precision of an audition-aged gold, hand-finished, limited color, each phrase delivered as if it might be the point at which her interest would politely surrender. Her goal was simple and visible. Choose, purchase, and leave with dignity. Yet the room's attention turned hard and prying, the way holiday light can mirror glass and make a window into a mirror, and a mirror into a test. Two women near the scarf display washed openly. One held a paper cup with a green mermaid and whispered something about clearance and crowding and how December brings all kinds. Their voices were careful enough to qualify as whispers and careless enough to travel. Evelyn heard them, as she had heard 1,000 versions before, and allowed the words to float past like confetti that was never meant for her celebration. She returned the bag to the counter and asked to try it on, then set it on her shoulder and stood straight, taking herself in with the composed curiosity one gives to a landscape painted from memory. In the glass, she could see the manager watching not the fit, but the hands. She could see the calculation behind his poise. Melissa Grant, the assistant manager, came out from the stockroom with a clipboard tucked under her arm, as if authority could be held the way a violin is held slight angle, ready to perform. "Do we have a question up front?" she asked Brian, smiling the light smile of someone who has practiced conflict choreography. He returned a smile that signaled mild inconvenience. The choreography did the rest. "Ma'am," he said to Evelyn, "before we proceed, our policy in December is to start a hold at the register for certain items. If you intend to purchase, we'll just begin with a card." "Of course," Evelyn said. The words were neither apology nor permission. She lifted the bag from her shoulder and rested it carefully on velvet, the way a person places a story in the middle of a table so no one can claim they never saw it. A man in a blazer, who had been exploring belts as if evaluating arguments, glanced over. His partner was looking at a long wallet and asking about engraving a date by tomorrow or the day after tomorrow at the latest, and the sales associate offered a gentle sir to soften the timeline. The couple resumed their comparison of shades while keeping Evelyn within the edge of their vision. Outside, brake lights layered the block in winter red. A child laughed in the distance at a street performer jingling a handful of sleigh bells. "I'll take this one." Evelyn said, "Gift wrap, please." It should have been nothing more than a sentence that moves the transaction forward. Instead, it was the line that made the room forget its script. Melissa's pleasantness tightened. "We can ring you right here," she said, and placed a tray of tissue and ribbon on the counter as if arranging evidence. Evelyn reached into her bag, steady and unhurried. The wallet came out smooth as a habit. She opened it, and the black metal card shone with a restrained gleam, the kind of black that says it is not trying to be anything else. Melissa's smile bent into astonishment, then bounced into performance. "We see a lot of novelty cards during the holidays," she said, almost kindly. "May I?" She did not wait for an answer. Her fingers lifted the card with an ownership that did not belong to her. "Please return that," Evelyn said, her voice even. It was not a plea. It was a request announced in the register of a fact. "Just a moment," Melissa answered, turning the card in the light to find some trick in it. "We had an incident last week. People think limited inventory means limited rules. The temperature in the boutique changed by 1 degree. Brian straightened as if taking the stage. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm sure you understand we have to protect our merchandise." Ozzy died for, and our brand," added the woman with the coffee, "to no one and to everyone. People try things." Evelyn rested her hand beside the bag. "Your brand will be fine," she said. "Please ring the purchase." Melissa's laugh was small and brittle. "We can't process a hold with a prop," she said. "If you have a standard card, we can start there." A murmur swelled and broke across the room. The couple by the bell stopped pretending not to listen. A tourist near the entrance raised his phone and tilted it down again, surprised by his own impulse to document and embarrassed by it. Somewhere toward the back, a young voice said, "Are you kidding me?" And a second young voice answered, "No, this is happening right now." Evelyn kept her eyes on the tray, on the ribbon, on the small scissors that waited like punctuation. She spoke without heat. "You are holding my card. You will either return it to me or call your director to the counter." 我一个肯定. Brian moved closer, careful not to look like he was moving closer. "Ma'am, if you're unwilling to cooperate, I'll have to ask you to leave. We have a waiting list. We can't tie up the floor." The words arrived on velvet and landed like gravel. The women with the coffee drifted a step near, attracted to certainty the way some people are attracted to sales. I saw a video. One of them announced, apologetic and triumphant at once. Last week, a woman tried to walk out with a bag and they had to. She stopped, sensing that the line did not belong to her anymore. Melissa did not stop. "For your information," she said, tapping the card against the counter as if testing metal for a secret, "limited color means limited patience. We reserve these items for clients who are known to us." "I understand," Evelyn said, and there was the faintest curl of humor in the words, as if she had tasted something familiar and found it unchanged. "I'll wait for the director." A door opened. The director did not appear. Instead, a security attendant did, a tall man with a name tag that read Derek. He offered a greeting that contained more respect than his job description required. "How can I help?" he asked, glancing at Evelyn. Then at the card in Melissa's hand, then back to Evelyn. He saw something the policy had not accounted for. A woman whose steadiness unsettled the assumption that steadiness is a costume. Brian cleared his throat. "We're concluding this interaction," he said. "Ma'am, please step away from the counter." The sales floor edged to a halt. The tray of tissue paper stood like a still lake. From the speakers, holiday music continued its gentle script about homecomings and snow that Los Angeles would never see. Outside, a tour guide gestured at a row of palms and told visitors from the Midwest that movie stars had once bought their first handbags right here, that you could tell who was famous by the way a crowd pretended not to notice them. Evelyn did not move. "You may return my card," she said to Melissa, "or you may place it on the counter and step back." Her tone said that dignity is not a request. It is a boundary. Melissa placed the card on the glass, not quite gently. "We will not be proceeding," she announced. "We reserve the right to refuse service." "For cause?" Evelyn asked. "For policy," Melissa replied. "Policy is a story," Evelyn said, "and stories can be edited." The room considered that in a silence that was not quite agreement and not quite rebellion. The couple by the bells looked at each other and then at Brian as if they wanted to return the tone he had bought, and asked for a different one. Derek shifted his weight, uncertain which way to lean. The young voices from the back came closer, phones in their hands now. Not high, not obvious, but present. Brian raised his chin. Ma'am, I'm asking you to leave the store. And I am asking you, Evelyn said, to ring the purchase. He gestured toward the door with a hand meant to look like procedure, and succeeded at looking like impatience. Derek, he said. Derek did not move. He was watching Evelyn's face, and there was something in it, an old grief rubbed smooth into wisdom, a refusal to trade self-respect for momentary peace that asked for a longer look. Maybe we pause, he suggested. We do not pause. Melissa snapped. We follow policy. Evelyn exhaled, a small breath that did not belong to surrender. She reached for her bag and returned the wallet to its pocket, the card on the counter untouched until Melissa pushed it an inch toward her as though returning a prop from a rehearsal she no longer found entertaining. A cluster of shoppers near the bracelets drifted nearer. The air felt walled in by the consequences of small choices. Ma'am, Brian said, this conversation is over. Now you, why, intus I know why it is, and. He believed it. He wanted it. He said it with the confident wariness of people who have been allowed to declare endings for other people. What he did not see was that endings often begin the moment someone decides not to accept a script. Evelyn's phone began to ring. She let it sound once, then twice, then answered without hurry and pressed the speaker button so gently it was as if she were turning a page. Sorry, she said, voice calm and carried to every corner of the boutique. I'm being held at Chanel Rodeo Drive. We'll revisit this in the board of directors meeting. Evening settled over Rodeo Drive with a gentle confidence, as if the street had practiced for years to greet winterlight just this way. The boutique brightened itself by instinct, turning up its halos over glass and silk until the cases hummed with a soft, expensive glow. Valet runners jogged to the curb and back, offering short ma'am and sir greetings that floated in and out as the door opened. People arriving from the cafes on Beverly carried the warmth of paper cups and cinnamon into the room. More shoppers drifted in from the sidewalks where palm trees wore white lights like fine jewelry. Inside, the air stayed citrus clean, the music quiet enough to hear shoes whisper against marble. All of this continued, as it always did in December, while a smaller, sharper mood gathered around the counter where Evelyn Carter stood with the steadiness of someone who refused to be hurried into another person's story. The previous moment, the one that belonged to her phone on speaker, and the phrase about a board of directors still hovered near the ceiling like a bell that had not finished ringing. A few customers pretended not to have heard it. A few did not bother to pretend. The clerk, who had been wrapping a scarf, looked up, paused, and then wrapped more carefully, as if neat corners could keep the room from spilling. None of that changed the simple, visible purpose Evelyn still held in her hands. Purchase the bag and leave with her dignity intact. Near the fragrance wall, a teenager lifted her phone and turned it from selfie to worldview. She wore a denim jacket and confidence, and she spoke in that bright, on-air tone that belongs to anyone under 20 who has learned to make an audience out of 3 friends and then, suddenly, out of strangers. We are at Rodeo Drive, this is a Chanel boutique, and I am not kidding, she said, breath quick, voice pitched to travel. You are about to see something real. Her name was Chloe Reed, and she had been filming a light-hearted shopping diary 2 blocks away until the comments on her last post nudged her toward the door with the double C's. She had a talent for catching the moment right before it became a headline, and that talent told her to tilt the camera so the counter, the manager, the assistant manager, and the older black woman would all be in the same frame. The screen filled with chat balloons that stacked like confetti, heart icons, exclamation marks spelled out with words, remarks from friends who lived in other zip codes, and from people who lived somewhere called everywhere. Chloe's tone shifted from playful to careful, the way a driver's hands shift on the wheel when black ice is possible. Keep it respectful, she said into the stream. We are documenting, not dragging. At the counter, Brian Keller kept his posture like a blade held flat. He had, until now, looked like a man arranging inventory and speech in equal measure. The live camera made him look like a man arranging excuses. Ma'am, he said to Evelyn, without looking at Chloe's lens. We are done here. But done is a word that tries to sew up a scene, and scenes that belong to more than two people rarely obey. Evelyn remained upright, hands relaxed on the edge of the case that reflected her coat and the bag and the ceiling lights like a small sky. You may ring the purchase, she said, level as a spirit level. Her calm, heard through the lens and past the curated soundtrack, clicked with 1,000 viewers who had no reason to care about a December afternoon on a luxury street, and every reason to recognize the shape of a refusal. Calm is how a person stays human while the room invites her to do the opposite. Chloe's audience multiplied the way flocks do when 100 birds decide to change direction at once. I'm sharing to my page, someone typed in letters stretched by urgency. This is the definition of profiling, wrote another. A third voice said, don't yell at them, just record. Let the truth show itself. It was not a mob instinct. It was a choir instinct, and it tuned itself to the note of fairness. The brass door opened, and a tall man stepped in, shaking City Chill from his cuffs. He paused the way travelers do when they enter a space set to a different temperature. The teenager's phone caught him turning toward the counter with the brief, respectful hesitation of someone choosing whether to intervene. Then he saw Evelyn's profile and the bag and the arrangement of a manager's shoulders, and the decision settled on his face like recognition. He crossed the floor with easy authority, as comfortable in the boutique as in the boardroom or a taxi on a rainy morning. Excuse me, he said, not to the room but to the air between him and Evelyn, as if asking permission to break it. Miss Carter? She looked over and offered a nod that could be friendship or simple acknowledgement or a reminder that politeness is a tradition worth keeping. Daniel, she said quietly. The name surprised Chloe, who had swung her camera to catch him and now swung it back. Daniel Reed kissed his daughter's hair without taking his eyes off the counter. He was a numbers man by trade, one of those people who can look at a spreadsheet and see a story trying to hide inside it. He noticed the assistant manager's grip on the black card, the way the manager's jaw held last word and policy between two teeth, the way the older woman's hands rested palm down as if claiming only her share of the glass. Is there a problem here? Daniel asked. Voice pitched for business meetings and small emergencies. It was not loud, it was the opposite of loud. The boutique knows how to amplify that kind of voice. We are concluding a conversation, Brian said to the glass, as if the glass were a sympathetic witness. We reserve the right to refuse service. For policy, Melissa added, still clutching the card like a stage prop, especially with limited inventory. Daniel glanced at the bag, at the shelf tag that said nothing and everything about price. He nodded to himself as if he had found a figure in his head that matched what he saw. Understood, he said. Then here's another policy. Do not touch a customer's property without consent. Melissa's smile thinned, then reappeared, repented. We are verifying authenticity. The authenticity of what? Daniel asked. The card or the person? Chloe's viewers turned the question into a chorus, typing it out as if repetition could chisel it into the counter. The boutique's music changed to a winter standard, and the rhythm of it somehow made the room's silence feel deliberate. At the far case, a tourist whispered about dinner reservations and how valet appreciated cash. A sales associate nodded and added, there is always room for kindness. Evelyn did not step aside. She did not speak over anyone. She let the moment stand in its own clothes until the moment grew uncomfortable in them. Then she said, not to win anything, but to keep the ground level. Please return my card. Please ring the purchase. Abene Hao, a boy near the door, high school age, whispered that his mother had been followed in a store once, that she had pretended to be lost in order not to cry in the aisle. He did not raise his phone. He did not need to. The room had enough cameras now. Chloe's stream ticked upward again, not by ones but by waves. We are now live to more people than fit in this door, she said softly, almost to herself. Behave like it matters. The comments began to move too fast for any young hand to scroll. Someone said they were mirroring the feed to another platform where longer videos lived. Someone else said they had sent a link to a local reporter. A third said they were in a rideshare on La Cienega and could be at the corner in 5 minutes if anyone needed a witness. Brian looked at Melissa, and the look said that the room had slipped a notch from luxury into risk. All right, he announced. Like a teacher snapping a book closed. This interaction is over. He nodded at the security attendant. Derek. Ke. Derek stepped forward only one pace, hands open. He met Evelyn's eyes and saw that his uniform did not threaten her. The uniform was just fabric, and the person in it had choices. Ma'am, he said, soft and professional, would you like a seat or water? The question moved through the boutique and set something right even before it was answered. Thank you, Evelyn said. No. Herr Vriend, Melissa tapped the card on the glass as if it were a piece of cutlery that could summon service. We are not proceeding, she repeated, borrowing authority from a sentence she had used before. We've had incidents lately. You understand? I understand, Evelyn said. I understand very well. Her phone, face down on the counter, buzzed once with a text, and then fell still again. She did not reach for it. Outside, a pair of tourists took a photograph of the window display, admired the reflection of their matching scarves, and then, noticing the cluster by the counter, took another photograph because everybody believes a second photograph makes a story truer. The boutique store opened for a woman in a coat the color of old wine. She took one step in, read the room as if it were a novel with the binding cracked in the middle, and stepped back out to greet the air. Daniel eased closer to Melissa in a way that gave her room to move, not a corner to panic in. I want to be very clear, he said. If you do not return the card to Miss Carter, we will involve law enforcement. Not to punish anyone, but to document exactly what has happened here. Melissa's fingers faltered. She set the card down on the glass with more force than necessary, then released it as if it had grown warm. There, she said. Satisfied? Evelyn did not touch the card yet. She did not have to reclaim it to prove ownership. The card's being there, flat on the glass, was a sentence that did not require punctuation. She looked at Brian, then at the teenager's camera, then kindly, almost at Derek. The sale? She asked. Brian pressed his lips together. Pride tried to find him a way out through policy. Fear suggested a door marked apology. Habit, old and well-fed, kept him standing at the counter, like a man on a little raft of rules. From the sidewalk, a small laugh rose and fell, followed by someone calling a rideshare and asking the driver to wait an extra minute. Inside, the chat on Chloe's phone mentioned local stations by name, said one anchor loved live pictures, said another show enjoyed stories that tested people in suits. It was not cruelty, it was attention, and attention has its own weather. A couple near the bell spoke up, polite and firm. We watched the whole thing, the woman said. She asked to buy the bag. You took her card. Please, just complete the purchase. Please, the man echoed. It is the right thing. Derek glanced toward the back office, hoping for the appearance of a director who might declare a wiser policy. No one came. The boutique smelled suddenly more strongly of leather. Or maybe that was simply what nerves smell like when they try to hide under good materials. Chloe lowered her voice and narrated for the thousands gathered where they lived. She is still calm. She is keeping her voice low. The manager looked stuck. We are staying respectful. We are at Rodeo Drive, near Beverly. If you know someone who can help, text them. A woman in a camel coat, the one with the coffee from earlier, looked down into her cup as if a different answer lay at the bottom. She set the cup on the bench, went to the register, and asked another associate for a gift box. Her voice shook. For a friend, she said. But the associate and the whole boutique knew she meant it for herself, something to carry out that was not regret. Daniel checked his watch out of habit, then corrected the gesture to something that looked more like patience. He did not need to track minutes to understand that a line had already been crossed. He remembered teaching Chloe when she was very small to say please and thank you in every room. Not because rooms need manners, but because people do. He felt the weight of that lesson on his shoulder and hoped that the camera would keep teaching it after the limelight went dark. Brian finally lifted his gaze to meet Evelyn's. Perhaps he meant to say no. Perhaps he meant to say yes. The sentence never had a chance to form. There was a sound from the street that does not care about boutiques or December or the way a manager's pride stands on tiptoe. It was a sound that belongs to the city when the city decides to look directly at itself. The sound of LAPD sirens rose outside. Blue and red light washed the glass, a signal that the balance was about to shift. Blue and red washed over the boutique's marble like tide colors in a slow, relentless swell, and the room, so carefully arranged for winter cheer, learned a new kind of quiet. The door opened to the evening and admitted 2 officers who carried the temperature of the street in, with them cool, alert, and professional. They did not hurry. They did not raise their voices. They brought the sort of order that makes people decide who they are in the next breath. The first wore sergeant stripes and a calm that has seen every version of a bad moment and still chose the measured path. The second took position slightly to his left, eyes moving once around the boutique as if inventorying exits, hands, and reasons. A few shoppers stepped back, shoulders loosening the way crowds do when responsibility enters wearing a badge. Someone near the door whispered that he had never seen police on Rodeo Drive at this hour. Another person whispered back that the hour does not matter when respect has been miscounted. Inside the bright circle of the counter, the manager's posture went rigid, and the assistant manager's smile vanished like a light turned off to save power. Evelyn Carter did not change her stance. Her hands rested lightly on the glass. Her purse sat to one side. The bag she intended to purchase, with it on its velvet square, patient as a truth a room is not ready to hear. Chloe Reed steadied her phone, her voice low to her viewers. Be respectful. Be clear. This is evidence, not entertainment. Daniel Reed moved an inch closer to his daughter without blocking her lens, occupying the middle ground between instinct and judgment. Good evening, the sergeant said, and in that greeting there was no threat, only a promise to listen and a promise to act. What happened here? The manager answered first, because managers always think the first word will decide the last. He arranged his features into a look that said policy had been followed. Just a service issue, he said. We are concluding a conversation with a customer who declined to cooperate with store procedures. The sergeant shifted his attention to Evelyn and tipped his head, the way one human being tips a door to openness. Ma'am, are you all right? Do you need medical assistance? I need my dignity respected, Evelyn said, voice even, and I would like to complete the purchase. The assistant manager, still holding a clipboard as if it could moonlight as a shield, spoke over the end of that sentence. We had an incident last week, she explained to the sergeant, and during the holidays we verified certain items before we. The sergeant lifted one hand, palm down, the peaceable signal for one voice at a time. He turned to the security attendant. Sir, did you observe any physical contact or seizure of property? Derek, who had watched the afternoon tip toward something it should never have been, answered with quiet precision. He described the moment the black car left Evelyn's hand without consent, the refusal to ring the sale, the request that she leave. He did not embroider, he did not accuse. He gave the facts a stable floor to stand on. Thank you, the sergeant said. He returned his attention to Evelyn. Ma'am, would you like to make a statement? I will, she said, and I would like the camera to remain Weird Island. She glanced at Chloe. Young lady, keep your distance and keep your courtesy. Yes, ma'am, Chloe answered, her voice softening into gratitude. In the comment stream, viewers urged calm, typed out prayers, shared the location with local reporters, and reminded one another to capture the edges of the room, not just the faces in the center. The audience had grown from the size of a classroom to the size of a small town. The boutique was now a public square with velvet displays. The sergeant asked for names. The manager replied with practiced clarity, and the assistant manager nodded hard enough to count as corroboration. When it was Evelyn's turn, she spelled her name without haste. The sergeant repeated it, as if committing it to memory mattered more than committing it to a form. Miss Carter, did anyone strike you or restrain you? No one struck me, she said. They took my card without consent and refused to sell me a bag I had chosen, after implying I did not belong here. The manager tried to lower the temperature and the stakes at once. We implied no such thing, he said. We were simply applying policy. Limited inventory requires discretion. Discretion is a choice, Daniel said, polite as a lecture hall and firm as a ledger, and so is respect. Blast. The junior officer Johnson, his name tag said, asked for the card in question. The assistant manager slid it toward him with 2 fingers, a gesture that pretended to be cooperative and failed. He inspected it without touching anything but the air above it and looked to the sergeant, for the next step. Miss Carter, the sergeant asked, do you have identification with you? Evelyn met his gaze, and the kindness there gave her the small permission people need to trust a process that has not always trusted them. She produced her driver's license. He glanced at the document, at the card on the counter, and back to her. No conclusion yet, only care. We can resolve this cleanly, the manager said, adopting a tone borrowed from upscale apologies. We regret any misunderstanding, but the item is spoken for. We will be happy to place the customer on a list for future allocations. There is no misunderstanding, Evelyn said. There is only a decision you made, and another I am making. The room took that in with a pulse like a heartbeat through marble. A tourist near the sunglasses display looked away, embarrassed by the parts of himself that recognized both sentences. The holiday soundtrack tried to sell comfort. Rodeo Drive glowed in the windows as if the outdoors had dressed for an audience with the indoors. On the stream, someone wrote that their grandmother had taught them to keep their voice low and their spine straight. Someone else wrote that their aunt had been refused service for wearing a uniform after a night shift and had never returned to that street again. Ma'am, the sergeant said to Evelyn, I also need to ask whether you wish to pursue a report regarding the seizure of your card. I will, she said, and I wish to finish my errand. The manager took a breath meant to reset him into authority. We are not proceeding with a sale, he repeated, clinging to the phrase that had carried him this far. He attempted a smile for the officers. We can handle this internally, respectfully, Daniel said. You attempted to handle this internally when you thought no one would notice. That moment has passed. Oh, the sergeant nodded once, as if acknowledging a truth that had outgrown the boutique's lease. All right, he said, here is how we will proceed. We will document statements, we will review the footage available to us, and we will ensure that property is returned to its owner. If there is an alleged assault, we will address it. If there is a civil matter, that will be for counsel, not the sidewalk. Evelyn reached for her phone and turned it face up. The lock screen lit briefly with a snow scene from a place that had actual winter. She unlocked it with the ease of muscle memory, found her recent calls, and selected one. When the other end answered, she pressed the speaker button. Her voice was the same as it had been since she walked in. Calm enough to build a bridge, steady enough to bear weight. Apologies for the delay, she said to the air and the room, and the thousands listening through a teenager's lens. I am being held at Chanel on Rodeo Drive. Please push the board of directors meeting by 30 minutes. The reply came crisp and courteous, the texture of expensive carpeting and long corridors. A woman at first, then a man, confirming adjustments and referencing an agenda that did not belong to handbags. We are at Goldman Sachs, the voice said. We will hold the room. The sentence reached every corner. It slid beneath the registers and along the glass. It climbed the phones of people who were not in the boutique but felt suddenly present inside it. Daniel did not smile, because this was not a moment for triumph. Chloe's hand trembled once and steadied again. The manager's face was a summary of decade-old habits startled awake to find themselves outnumbered. The sergeant did not blink. Experience had trained him to let surprising details settle before he stepped on them. Thank you, Miss Carter, he said. Please end the call for now. She did, and the room found itself listening to its own breath again. Is there a director on site? The sergeant asked the staff. Silence, then a cautious answer. Not at this hour. Do? Call one, he said. The assistant manager reached for a phone with the reluctant energy of a person waking to an alarm set for another shift. She stepped 2 paces away and began to murmur into the receiver, shaping an explanation that would take too long to finish and not cover enough ground when it did. Derek watched her go, then watched Evelyn, his expression aligning with the side of the scale that carried weight. Officer Johnson collected names and numbers from the nearest witnesses. The couple near the belt spoke clearly. The woman in the camel coat produced a receipt from another purchase made earlier and said she had been treated quickly and kindly, and that kindness should not depend on the shade of a person's skin or the stealth of a person's coat. 2 tourists from the Midwest offered their first names and hotel as if offering an address could qualify them as trustworthy. The sergeant wrote everything down. each syllable treated as if it might be needed later to rebuild the shape of what had happened. "Ma'am," he said to Evelyn again, "if you prefer to step into some place more private while we sort this, we can do that." "I prefer to remain where the first decision was made," she said. "Sunlight is a good disinfectant. So are chandeliers." It was not anger, it was not theater, it was the declaration of a citizen who believed a public wrong deserved a public answer. Across the common stream, people typed the word dignity until it read like a small prayer. Outside, a tour bus rolled by, the guy pointing out a restaurant where celebrities used to sit in the corner near the window, never hiding and never fully seen. Inside, the assistant manager ended her call with a tiny, helpless shrug that was not quite defeat and not quite courage. "Are we under arrest?" the manager asked, trying on intonation the way someone tries on a jacket one size too small. "No," the sergeant said. "You are under observation." The reply landed without heat. It did not need heat. Authority spoken without hurry can warm or chill on its own. A door at the back clicked. No director emerged. No apology marched forward. Only the holiday music changed again, choosing a song about home that sounded ironic to people who had been made to feel uninvited in a store selling leather and metal as if they were passports. Evelyn picked up her card, not as a trophy, but as a tool, and set it gently beside the bag. "The purchase stands," she said. "So does the record of how we got here." 单长. The sergeant looked at the manager and at the assistant manager, then at the teenager's camera that had turned the boutique into a town hall. He made a note. He looked again at the woman whose voice had not lifted once and whose presence had lifted the ceiling. He glanced at the manager, then turned back to Evelyn, his tone firm and respectful. "Miss Carter, I need to verify your true identity. This is moving beyond the store. I'm not..." The marble counter held the weight of a moment that had stopped pretending to be small. The boutique's winter glow softened nothing. It only made the edges clearer. Behind the glass, the handbag waited like a promise that had heard too many doubtful voices. Evelyn Carter stood where she had stood from the beginning, hands calm, posture straight, the kind of stillness that makes other people realize how much noise they are making. Around her, conversations thinned into whispers that did not know whether to be curious or ashamed. The officers had finished their first pass of questions. The sergeant's notebook lay open on a page that would not be argued with later. In the doorway, the traffic of Rodeo Drive slid by like a slow river of red taillights, winter lights braided through the palms, tourists pausing to take one more photograph because the evening was inventing a story and they wanted proof they had been nearby. From the back of the boutique, a door clicked, and the assistant manager's voice floated forward with the strained brightness of someone trying to pull sunlight through a phone line. No director appeared. No apology arrived. The room understood, as rooms do, that the person who should have walked out first had chosen not to. That absence had a shape. It also had a cost. The live stream in Chloe Ree's hands widened its view, catching the counter, the officers, the stillness of the older black woman, and the way a manager's jaw can hold the last inch of a bad decision until professional training mistakes it for dignity. Evelyn reached into her bag and withdrew a slender portfolio, the leather worn to a soft gloss by years of meetings, flights, and rooms where kindness had to be carried in and opened like a tool. She laid it on the counter with a care that belonged to important papers and to unbroken truths. The assistant manager's eyes flicked to the portfolio as if it might be a trick. The manager looked everywhere but at it. Daniel Reed looked straight at it, then at Evelyn's face. And he understood not the details on the pages, not yet, but the meaning of preparation. People who plan for storms do not look for shelter at the first drop. They unfold what they brought. She unfastened the clasp and turned a page the way a musician turns to the next measure with no hurry and no apology. "Officer," she said softly, "you asked for verification." She slid forward a summary statement on Carter Holdings. Not the whole story, not the private map, just enough of the coastline to prove the continent exists. The sergeant read without moving his head, his eyes traveling line by line. He did not signal surprise. Professionals learn that surprise broadcast can set a room on fire. He let the information settle where it would do its work. The manager tried to reach for irony and found it too high on the shelf. Anyone can print a document, he said, and his voice reached for a chuckle and landed on a cough. The assistant manager said nothing. She had the look of a person whose favorite staircase had admitted that it never led to the floor she thought. Daniel stepped to the edge of the counter. May I? He kept his hands visible, polite to the process. Evelyn nodded. He scanned the page, recognized a set of capital letters he had seen in filings and calls, and returned the page to its place. He did not perform recognition. He stated it. This aligns with public records, he said. Carter Holdings has controlling interest in Elite Retail Group. 当仔. The live stream absorbed the sentence and translated it for the thousands listening wherever they were. On the bus, along La Cienega, in the kitchen, in Inglewood, in a living room in the Midwest, where a nephew had taught an aunt how to cast a phone screen onto a television. The chat became a low chorus of words like truth, respect, and finally, a few voices tried to light the match of mockery. The rest of the crowd breathed it out. Be decent, Chloe reminded them, almost a whisper now. Stay with the facts. Evelyn turned another page, not to dazzle anyone but to finish a thought. A letter of intent, a board resolution, an ownership chart that showed lines like highways, and a circle drawn around a company that had bought 1,000 mirrors and forgotten to look into one. I did not come here to wave paper, she said. I came here to buy a bag. But since we are telling stories about policy, let us use the right one. The sergeant nodded to Officer Johnson, whose pen had found the rhythm of recording without judgment. He looked at the manager. Sir, return the customer's property and step back, he said, not unkindly. The card, already on the glass, did not need returning. The instruction was about position. The manager obeyed, retreating half a pace, discovering how much power a person does not have when the floor asks him to share it. From outside came the thump-thump of a news van settling against the curb. The boutique's windows caught the camera lights and turned them into a winter glare that made everyone blink. The local station's producer peered in, recognized the story, and turned to signal a photographer. Chloe's stream wrote the same sentence in real time. The press is here. Someone typed that a national anchor had picked up the link. Someone else typed that their mother was crying in a grocery aisle because hearing a voice like Evelyn's low, steady, not asking for anything she did not already have, by right felt like a homecoming. A woman in a wine-colored coat edged nearer the counter and found her voice. I was helped here earlier, she said, eyes on the manager, then on Evelyn. It was quick. It was easy. No one asked me for anything I didn't offer. That is the difference. That is all the difference. She blushed at her own honesty and stepped back, holding her bag as if it were a flag she had not meant to raise. The back door opened again, and this time a new figure crossed the threshold into the bright front of the store. Victoria Hale, the store director, had the posture of someone who believed in glass more than in people. She took one look at the officers, one at the portfolio on the counter, and one at the camera that had turned her store into a stage. Her first word was a greeting to the sergeant. Her second was an apology shaped like an invitation to end the scene. We can resolve this, she said. Let us move to the office. We will resolve it here, the sergeant replied, not unkindly. He touched his notebook with a finger. This started here. Victoria adjusted her expression to something appropriately chastened. She shifted to practice phrases miscommunication, holiday strain, new staff members learning procedures. They fell, one by one, on the glass, and did not stick. The assistant manager swallowed. The manager stared at a point just above the sergeant's shoulder, the way a boy stares when a teacher asks a question he does not know how to answer. Evelyn closed the portfolio, set her palm flat on it, and looked at Victoria without challenge and without fear. Your staff refused to ring a cell and seized my card, she said. They implied, in word and tone, that I did not belong here. The camera is not the problem. It is the cure. Her eyes moved to the bag waiting on velvet. The transaction is simple. The record will be 2. Victoria lifted a hand toward the register, a theater of compliance that might have played better 2 minutes ago. The sergeant's voice filled the moment before she could direct the scene. One more question, he said to Evelyn. Would you like to press charges for the taking of your card? Evelyn felt the store, its lighting, its air, Its careful music rearranged itself around the question. This was not about winning, it was about repair. I will file a report, she said. The law and I are old acquaintances, but I will also finish my errand. The manager at last found an action he could complete. He moved behind the register and began the motions of a sale, fingers on keys, eyes lowered. He looked oddly smaller in usefulness than he had in refusal. He asked for a name through his teeth. Evelyn spelled it out. He asked about wrapping, as if wrapping could wrap the afternoon. Evelyn said yes, the standard paper would be fine. He asked whether she would like to engrave a small charm with a date by tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. Evelyn did not smile, but her voice did. No engraving, she said. Sometimes a date belongs only to memory. 违章为 a clone as day. While the receipt printed the little scroll of words that believes it can make anything official, the crowd kept time with the boutique's hum. The couple near the belts exhaled, as if they had been holding their breath through a tunnel. Derek stepped aside so the officers could see the counter clearly and so the camera could see that nothing hid in the hands. Chloe's stream climbed past more than 30,000 viewers, her breath catching once, then smoothing out as she narrated what mattered and ignored what did not. She's still calm, she said. They are ringing her up. We stayed respectful. Keep your comments respectful. The sergeant asked Victoria, in a tone that admitted no theatrics, to provide her full name and contact information. She did, and the spelling looked longer than it had this morning. Officer Johnson collected the assistant manager's information and the manager's too, and wrote a small note about demeanor that was not an insult, simply a record of posture against daylight. The woman in the wine coat stood straighter, as if she had been measured against something other than her credit line and liked the number. The receipt arrived. The bag was wrapped. The ribbon lay exactly where a ribbon should lie when people are watching. The manager held out the package the way a person holds out a truth that has learned the price of delay. Evelyn accepted it and thanked him, because gratitude is not endorsement, and because manners belong to the person who keeps them. She set the package gently on the counter and left her palm on it, feeling the substance through paper and box, the way a mother might rest a hand on the crib and listen for breathing. The sergeant nodded to her, then to Chloe, then to Daniel. He had walked enough corridors and solved enough arguments to recognize the shape of endings that lead back to beginnings. He stepped toward the manager. Sir, he said, I am placing you under arrest for the unlawful taking of personal property and for creating a disturbance that escalated into the need for police intervention. You have the right to remain silent. The words were clear. They did not celebrate themselves. Officer Johnson stepped to the assistant manager, who blinked fast and then faster and waited for instructions that did not come. The bracelets of procedure shone briefly and were gone into the angle of a shoulder and the line of an arm. The boutique breathed for the first time in an hour that had felt like a season. Chloe lowered her phone and raised it again because she remembered the work was not finished and because thousands of strangers had become a kind of neighborhood. Daniel touched his daughter's shoulder and felt the small electric pride that comes when a lesson you once taught returns to teach you back. Outside, the news camera found its focus. Inside, Derek exhaled and looked at the older woman, wondering how a person learns to stand so straight for so long. Evelyn lifted the wrapped box, the weight familiar now, in the way that some victories feel both heavy and correct. She did not announce anything. She did not preach. She simply looked into the lens that had become a mirror and let the city see itself clearly. Then, in a voice just loud enough to travel to every corner of the boutique and to the sidewalk and to the little televisions in kitchens and the big ones in living rooms, she said, "This is only the first step. I want the entire system to see this lesson." The helicopter's thrum reached the boutique as a textured sound rather than a shout, a low turning that vibrated the glass and made the chandelier quiver as if feeling the weather change. Outside, camera lights multiplied until the window reflected a small constellation, and people on the sidewalk gathered the way neighbors gather when the street itself has something to say. Inside, the officers held their quiet places. The manager stared at a patch of air that would not rescue him, and Evelyn Carter remained where she had been all afternoon, with her palms resting lightly near the wrapped box a figure of patience in the room that had finally run out of excuses. A suited man entered with two colleagues who had the polished stillness of people trained to move without drawing attention. He carried apology in his shoulders and calculation in his briefcase. Richard Owens introduced himself to the sergeant by name and to the room by presence, the kind that arrives late and hopes it still counts. He looked at the counter, at the portfolio, at the teenager's phone tilted like an eye that never blinks. He addressed Evelyn first, because the moment would allow no other order. "Miss Carter," he said, voice trimmed of ornament, "on behalf of Elite Retail Group, I am sorry." He did not reach for her hand. He did not dare. This should never have happened. Bah. How. The apology fell into a space that had been cleared for it by need, not by courtesy. People on the sidewalk leaned closer to the glass. The livestream audience swelled as if a door had been opened and 1,000 more had been invited in. Chloe Reed steadied her breath and let the microphone of the room, its very air, carry the words outward. Daniel Reed repositioned himself so that no one blocked the view of the counter where the afternoon's lesson had been written line by line. Evelyn regarded the CEO with a level gaze that measured ownership differently than stock certificates do. "Mr. Owens," she said, "your staff refused to sell an item to a paying customer, seized her card without consent, and attempted to escort her out. The cameras did not create this. They illuminated it." She glanced at the officers, then back to him. "An apology does not end a pattern. A remedy does." "Ole." He nodded as if he had spent the last few minutes practicing that nod and was grateful for the chance to use it. "Tell me what you require," he said. It sounded brave until one listened for the tremor beneath. Evelyn named the terms without raising her voice. Immediate termination of the manager who had escalated the situation and the assistant manager who had sustained it. Paid training across the network in recognizing and interrupting bias. Not a single workshop, but a recurring obligation with standards and consequences attached. A public statement that described the harm without euphemism and described the response without self-congratulation. A third-party audit of customer treatment during the next 2 quarters, with findings to be made available not just to shareholders but to the people who shop here. A fund, she liked that word better than initiative, because it announces money, not intentions to support community organizations that work on dignity in public accommodations. "Call it the Customer Dignity Fund," she said, "and fund it at $5 million each year, starting now." Richard Owens absorbed the list with the careful face of a man trying to write neat columns while the desk rocks under his elbows. "We can commit to this," he said, the plural trying to perform unity. "We should discuss." "Not in a back office," Evelyn said. "Not by email. Not later. I am not here to negotiate in private, because the injury was public." She tapped the wrap box gently, a gesture that looked like affection and read as emphasis. "And one more condition. A protocol for the floor. If you like names, call it the Carter Protocol. It will specify what a staff member may not do to a customer, and what a staff member must do when a colleague crosses a line." "We are..." The director, Victoria Hale, who had entered a few minutes earlier with posture and phrases, weighed the air and found that it no longer supported old moves. "We will adopt it," she said. And if assent sounded like surrender, it also sounded like survival. The sergeant watched the exchange with the discipline of someone who has spent years observing how institutions pivot under pressure. He recorded the terms in his notebook, not as law, but as a record of what people promise when the lights are on. Officer Johnson continued taking statements from the witnesses who had waited patiently, their holiday plans suspended by a feeling that justice had stepped briefly onto their street and required their attention. Through the glass, a camera crew lifted a boom mic, and the reporter in the navy coat rehearsed the line without moving her lips. The crowd shifted a little, making room for more bodies and for the coat that had followed the helicopter down. Inside, a sales associate quietly offered bottled water to anyone who wished, saying "ma'am" and "sir" with a softness that tried in its small way to repair the tone of the place. Richard Owens signed a brief memo on his tablet authorizing immediate suspension. While corporate processes caught up, the gesture looked procedural, but the effect was not. Derek, the security attendant, stepped aside as the officers completed their work. The manager did not resist. not because he agreed, but because the day had taken the starch out of his resistance. The assistant manager stared at the corner of a display, where an earring caught the light, and did not move her eyes even when the light changed. Chloe narrated what she could verify and refused to guess at what she could not. She told her audience that the CEO had arrived, that he had apologized, that terms were being established in plain language, that the officers remained calm, that the older woman's hands never shook. The comments scrolled faster than she could read, an irrigation of words across a field that had been dry for too long. Gratitude, anger, memory, advice, names of other stores, names of family members who had been followed with eyes and assumptions, and never with care. She ignored the few who tried to turn the day into gossip. She let the rest write themselves into a small citizenship. Richard Owens cleared his throat and looked into the teenager's lens because he understood that any other lens would be the wrong one. "We failed," he said. "We will do the work that failure requires." He did not say if anyone was offended. He did not say unfortunate misunderstanding. He said the word fail and let it sit there heavy as it should be. Evelyn spoke next, not for spectacle, but because some things must be said while the room is still learning how to listen. "Here is what must be remembered," she said. "Belonging is not granted by a price tag. Courtesy is not earned by a wardrobe. Policy is not a mask for prejudice." She did not recite a mission statement. She wrote one. "If you run a store in this city, or any city, you mind the doors you open and the doors you close. You stay A." Daniel looked at his daughter and saw in her face the quick mental filing that adults underestimate: what to keep, what to throw away, what to repeat later to a friend who missed a life moment, because life had handed her a bus schedule and a double shift. He thought of numbers he had studied and cases he had argued, and how none of those had ever felt as precise as this older woman's simple sentences. The boutique adjusted itself around the new terms. Boxes remained boxes, ribbon remained ribbon. The register waited to perform its small ceremony of exchange. But the air, its attitude had changed. People permitted themselves a breath that had been shallow for an hour and a half. A tourist wiped a tear she did not understand. Another touched the arm of a stranger and said, "I'm glad I was here," as if bearing witness was a kind of gift one could take home. Richard Owens asked the practical question that executives default to when their tools are money and time. "Would you accept a written statement tonight?" he asked. "We can circulate it, and I can meet you tomorrow morning to discuss the protocol line by line." "Tonight," Evelyn said, "not tomorrow." She had learned, over a life of contracts and broken promises, that tomorrow is where intentions go to nap. Your team will send the draft to the sergeant for the report, and you will release it publicly before midnight. You will not bury it on a page only shareholders read. He nodded once and rolled the new deadline into the air with a tilt of his head. "Before midnight," he repeated. And some part of the crowd that remembered paper rules and late editions heard the seriousness in it. People in the livestream chat typed the words out longhand, as if spelling them would fasten them to the hours. "Before midnight." The sergeant checked with Evelyn one last time. "Do you need medical attention?" he asked again. "Because procedure requires repetition, and care requires it too." "I do not," she said. "I need the training funded and the protocol written and the apology printed where the sun can find it." She picked up the red box, then set it down again, as if reminding herself that she was allowed to keep something beautiful from this day after all. Silence held for a breath, the kind of breath people hold before an oath, and then sound returned in layers. A cough, the clink of a charm bracelet, a zipper on a coat, the helicopter lifting from the nearby roof and moving off toward the dusk. Victoria Hale turned to the staff and told them to close early, to help those already inside, to refer all calls to corporate. A sales associate approached the woman in the wine-colored coat and asked softly if she needed assistance. The woman shook her head and said she had already received what she needed. Outside, the reporter began her stand-up, but the window glass turned her words into a pantomime. Inside, Chloe ended the stream and saved it twice, then looked at Evelyn not as a celebrity, not as a symbol, but as a person who had taught her something with the unshowy tools of composure and sentences. "Thank you," she said. Because sometimes all the city can offer is gratitude, spoken in a voice still catching up to its own courage. Evelyn inclined her head. She turned to Richard Owens. One more thing, she said. The apology will include the phrase racism, not misunderstanding. The fund will post its grants publicly. The protocol will be printed and framed near the door, where anyone can read it before they are judged by anyone who thinks they own the threshold. Dig in. It will, he said, surprised to hear how quickly the words obeyed her. It will. She took the receipt from the counter and folded it once, carefully, as if folding paper could be a way of setting a day into order. She thanked the officers by name, because names matter when the uniform is the first thing a room sees. She thanked Derek for the smallest gestures, the question about water, the pause he had suggested when pause might have saved everyone time. She did not thank the manager or the assistant manager. Mercy is not confusion. People made space as she moved, and the space felt earned rather than commanded. The boutique doors parted for her, and for the winter air that carried a scent of eucalyptus and street food from the corner where a cart had parked for years, feeding tourists and night shift workers alike. Out on the sidewalk, someone began to clap, and then a few others did. Not a cheer, not a roar, just a steady rhythm of hands acknowledging that dignity had chosen to walk among them and had not asked permission to do it. Evelyn smiled, left the boutique to the beat of helicopter blades. A young customer whispered, "This is the day Rodeo Drive will never forget." The night on Rodeo Drive settled back into its usual glow, but something lasting had been left in the air. What began as a simple errand ended as a reminder that calm courage can shift the balance of an entire room, even one filled with doubt and prejudice. The heart of the story is not only about wealth or power revealed, but about the truth that dignity must be defended in public so it can be trusted in private. Injustice, once exposed, asks each of us to decide whether we will look away or stand steady. Like a lamp left burning quietly in a window, a single act of fairness can guide us through the darker corners of society. True strength is not loud. It is patient, unwavering, and rooted in the belief that every person deserves respect. Take a moment to think of the silent kindness that surrounds you, the neighbor's wave, the friend's steady voice, the stranger who opens a door without expecting thanks. If this story touched your heart, consider passing that warmth forward to someone who may be waiting for it tonight.